So I read an article yesterday that mentioned the idea of a direct stimulus payment that gets sent automatically when the economy hits a certain negative marker. Now this really stood out to me, really piqued my interest. However, the article itself didn't have a whole lot of information, so I did some digging and actually found a scientific paper titled If, When, How, a Primer on Fiscal Stimulus by Douglas Elmendorf and Jason Furman. This 30-page paper goes over the proposed idea of an automatic stimulus mechanism that's set up before it's ever actually needed, when a direct stimulus is actually needed in the economy, because it's not always needed, and then how this auto stimulus could work based on economic models that they have. So there it is. Go ahead and read it if you're interested. You know the title? Nah, I'm just playing. I read it for you guys. I'll present all the interesting highlights of the paper. So the paper starts by laying down a major issue. The response to an economic downturn is almost always too slow. In the case of the current downturn that we're in right now, the original CARES Act was actually approved quite quickly compared to normal bills. However, any amount of delay can make an economic downturn worse. This is what the paper states. They have research to back it. I'm not going to go over the exact numbers because I don't want to bore you guys too much. Or a more positive way of saying this is that responding quickly to a downturn can make things less bad. Positive. We got to focus on the positives. So they proposed the idea of a pre-legislated stimulus that would be enacted when the economy hits a specific marker. This would eliminate the need for any legislative measures and would eliminate any legislative delay because no negotiation would be needed to be done in the heat of the moment. Decisions could be made beforehand, no rash decisions made. Now this isn't said exactly in the paper, but I would assume that this would also limit the amount of personal or partisan interest that's attempted to be snuck into relief bills. If you set up the bill for a date at some point in the future that you don't know, it could be for next year, it could be for 10 years from now, the representatives of either side aren't going to be able to guess which personal or partisan issues to try and sneak into a bill because they don't know what's going to be going on at some random time in the future. However, a major issue that they point out with this is that legislators like recognition. They like recognition for their legislation. So it may go against their interest to work up a plan that may be enacted when they're potentially out of office. This is because if it gets enacted when they're not in office, they won't get those additional votes or social brownie points that they would if they enact something when they're in office. This issue aside, let's get more into how exactly this system would work. So first, the paper states that in most cases, monetary policy should be the first line of defense towards downturns. Fiscal policy should be the second line of defense in most cases. Monetary policy being things like the Federal Reserve adjusting federal funds rates, and then fiscal policy being things like stimulus packages or additional funding through certain government programs to get more funding to individuals during downturns. So they say that monetary policy is better as the first line in most cases for three reasons. The first reason being that the Fed can act much quicker than Congress. Like we said before, that legislative delay can cause problems. If we had to wait on that for everything, it wouldn't be so good. But the Fed can change rates on a dime, basically. Also, secondly, they say the Fed can judge timing and magnitude much better than basically anyone else. They have the best data, they have the best analysis, the most advanced everything. They're in the position to make the best decisions when it comes to the economy and what measures need to be done next. Third, and finally, they say poor judgment in a fiscal stimulus can actually have the opposite effect of what it's trying to accomplish. For example, cutting taxes without cutting government spending just results in a larger deficit in the long run, meaning worse economic conditions in the long run. However, they might help in the short run. So first line, monetary policy. Second line, fiscal policy. They say that Even though monetary policy should be the first line of defense, this doesn't speak against the value of certain automatic stabilizers like an automatic stimulus payment or an automatic stimulus event, however it would be formatted. So let's get into some ideas on how exactly this automatic stimulus could work. There's several markers that they say could be used to trigger a stimulus event. However, the one they talk about most is using the fluctuation in payroll employment to determine where exactly the economy is at. Basically, if there's more people working, the economy is doing better. If there's less people working, it's not doing so great. Seems to make total sense to me. So they propose a stimulus could be triggered when there's a negative change in employment for 3 months in a row. Then they cite some historical data, and it seems to line up exactly with economic downturns that turn out not so great. So they state that if this policy, the 3-month policy, had been in place for the last 40 years, we would have seen 9 automatically triggered stimulus events in the last 40 years. Those events would range with additional funding anywhere from 1 month to 15 months. So it makes sense. In the last 40 years, 9 events, that actually sounds about right to me. So what would this kind of stimulus even look like? Well, lucky for us, they give the most and least effective options based off of certain economic models and historical data. The common theme with the most effective stimuluses is that they seem to be really narrowly targeted for individuals who might need the funds most, which makes total sense. You get the funding to the people who need it most, they spend it, it helps out the economy. That's exactly what a stimulus needs to do. You don't want to get funding to people who don't need it because then they just save it. They don't spend it. It doesn't help the velocity of money. It doesn't really help the GDP as much. So for the most effective options, they give number 1 being extended unemployment insurance benefits. They say that this is the highest bang for the buck stimulus-wise, which when I read that, I was really glad to see it because that's exactly what we have in the current stimulus. It's an additional $600 every week, and that may be extended with future stimulus plans. The second one is increased food stamps temporarily. The idea would be to increase food stamps by 20% for 6 months. They say this would be an easy to administer stimulus because it's already in place, it's already easy to get those funds to people, and it would be very targeted to families who need the funds most or families who may be the most vulnerable during a downturn. Finally, the third one, the most effective, they say, is a direct stimulus payment, which is the same as that $1,200 payment that we received not too long ago. They say those 3 are the most effective bang for the buck stimulus-wise. Now, the least effective stimulus measures they give are number 1 being increasing infrastructure investment. They state that this is good for the long term, but doesn't really make a big difference short term. And then finally, the other not so great stimulus measure is reducing tax rates. They cite that reducing tax rates helps out people with more money more than it does help out people who are lower income. And again, back to that, if you're helping out the people with more money, they're not as likely to spend it. It won't stimulate the economy as much, and they don't need it as much. So it's not nearly as an effective stimulus. So I don't want to go too deep into the math of this because that's when everyone checks out. However, they point out that the automatic systems work well in most areas and would undoubtedly be a huge benefit when it comes to stimulus payments. Heck, I mean, we wouldn't even currently be arguing whether there should be another direct stimulus or not because if employment stayed low, we would already know that, hey, another automatic stimulus payment is on the way. You know, that peace of mind seems kind of nice to me. Like, we know, okay, if there's another month of poor unemployment, it sucks, but at least we know that there's a payment coming. We don't have to worry about legislators trying to figure things out, things getting delayed like that. Seems like a good idea, at least in theory. So what are your guys' thoughts on this? Is it the perfect stimulus plan, or is it off base? Is there something that they're not really figuring in? Just let me know in the comments. Also, if you guys like these in-depth research-based videos, go ahead and let me know in the comments below. Comment research gang so I know that you like them. Until next time, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope you have a profitable day.